of the ad-hoc Affordable Housing Committee of the Metro Council, and I appreciate all of you coming by. I see many that are not on the committee, but they came, and I'm also wanted to let you know that this is being taped and is going to be shown on Channel 3, and the objective is to share as much information with the community as possible. I have asked our new lawyer, Mike Jameson, sorry, I was going to say Cooper, to come and explain the legislation to us, the one that we approved at the last term. I also asked Doug Sloan to come, and there he is. Thank you, Mr. Sloan. Kerry is here too. And we also have John Cooper that decided to stay and join us today. Basically, we're going to just start with him going through the legislation, explaining it real fast, and then I'm going to give Mr. Sloan an opportunity to update us on the process that they are doing per our legislation. And I know we want to keep it short, so let's, I'm going to open the floor for questions, but if you go too fast, I'll take my whip and I'll start whipping you guys up. So, Mr. Jameson? Oh, yeah. Does it work?
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman Bedney. Between May and July of 2015, this council enacted Substitute Ordinance 2015-1139, amending Title 17 to establish requirements for affordable housing and workforce housing. The legislation noted the significant housing cost burdens that afflicted the population of Nashville. 58,000 Nashvillians pay more than a third of their income for housing. Also noted that rent increases over the past 10 years had gone up 75%, while affordable vacancy rates were down 20%. Planning had suggested in 2009, in a memo to the Vice Mayor, Diane Neighbors, that the council consider inclusionary zoning. So this council in 2015 enacted the substitute ordinance that first defined affordable housing and defined workforce housing, and then proposed a new chapter in the code entitled inclusionary zoning, with the specific intent being essentially the creation of additional opportunities for affordable and workforce housing. The methods were also suggested in the ordinance, including methods that defined the minimum sizes, minimum project size for which these workforce and affordable housing requirements could be implemented, and a goal of 14% of units in all residential developments in this county being reserved for affordable and workforce housing being the aspiration. Also created a mechanism for in lieu of payments being made to the Barnes Fund. With that, at the conclusion, the ordinance requested that the Executive Director of Metro Planning promulgate rules and regulations and do so within 180 days from the passage. Passage occurred at the end of June, and so January 24th of 2016 would be the ostensible deadline.
Okay, so what I'd like to do now is, if anybody has any question about this legislation, this is what the prior council passed, but some of the new council members may have questions about it, so I wanted to give you a chance to ask Mr. Jameson any questions you may have. Okay. Where are you? Kobe, did you? Okay. Sorry.
The number 14% was brought out there for the legislation, and I was trying to determine when the council passed and during its discussion from the previous term, is that a recommendation or is that a requirement that the planning department work toward that number?
The goal states it as or the ordinance lists it as a goal assigned to the planning department, so it's not mandated.
Councilman Davis.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, after all that back and forth, it was very clearly stated it was a goal. We were mandating that they come up with a comprehensive policy with inclusionary zoning included in that comprehensive policy, correct?
That is correct.
Great. And yeah, I didn't have any further questions, I was just kind of going to mention, very excited about this. Obviously, proud to be your co-chair, Mr. Chair. We've got some opportunities for learning coming up. NLC is about to start, of course, and I would just encourage everybody to attend. I'm sure there'll be a couple of affordable housing sessions at NLC. So in Austin, I learned a ton on what they're doing. Obviously, we're hosting this year. It's a little different, but I know there'll be some sessions, and there'll be a lot of other city council members and mayors and that sort of thing you can learn from. So I'll be attending those. If we can show up in good numbers there, that'd be great. And then, of course, the planning department is having this open policy discussion sessions, I guess, and that's open for anyone to come to, or not so much?
The meeting on the 10th is a stakeholders group meeting, and it is a public meeting for that people can attend and observe. The meeting on the 11th is a public meeting.
Okay, gotcha. And we're looking forward to those and just continuing to discuss what our practices should be here. We trust the planning department to help us come up with the right thing and how we can come up with a good comprehensive solution. So again, I'm excited to be on this committee and help serve, and I hope we come up with some great ideas. Thank you.
I appreciate you agreeing to be the vice chair. Thank you, Councilman Davis. Councilman Glover.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to get into the 14% number, whether it's 10%, 14%, 12, 8, doesn't really make any difference. Let's take a specific project, because I know there seems to be some confusion around this piece of it, and I realize we've not adopted anything yet. But as we proceed, and I want to understand, if I have a developer in my district that comes that wants to put together, let's just say, a project of $300,000 plus homes, and there's going to be, and we'll keep it simple, there's going to be 100 lots in there. If we pass some form of legislation here, are we now dictating that either 8, 10, 12, or 14 of those lots have to fall within the affordable housing? Or is this going to be citywide? I mean, how exactly will this work on a project-by-project basis? And I don't know if Mr. Sloan, if that's your question, Mr. Jameson, I don't know who's.
I think it's a Sloan question.
What I would say is that we don't know at this stage. Not sure exactly how the inclusionary zoning is going to work, or inclusionary housing is going to work. It really depends on, we're working with our consultant, who are economists, and tells us, and will hopefully give us information that we need to then present policies to you that will encourage affordable and workforce housing. It'd be great if we can figure out incentives to make it work in every development, but it really depends on what tools they bring back to us, because at the end of the day, if it doesn't make good economic sense, if it's not whatever the incentives are that we're able to come up with to present to the council, if it doesn't encourage developers to build workforce and affordable housing or mandate it in a way that makes economic sense for them and their projects, then we could be working backwards if we slow down the number of units. So it's incumbent upon us, Councilman, is to bring you tools that if it's something that is mandatory in every development, that we make sure that we're incentivizing it in a way that makes sense for the development community as well. And that may be simply a percentage that they have to pay into, as your legislation talks about, an in lieu fund. It may be developing other units in the area that may not, because of the number of lots that they have for that particular development. It may mean putting them along the transit corridor that's nearby so that the people who live in those housing can get in and out of where the jobs are. We're not sure. There are a lot of things that we're looking at right now with our consultant. And as I said a moment ago, looking at them to tell us how can we make all of these projects make economic sense where all development is helping us accomplish these goals. And so that's what we're working on right now. But it is, I believe, you have to approach these things so that we're a partner with developers and that we encourage it in a way and that we give incentives in a way, as I tell developers, and a lot of developers want to come in and meet with us right now to try and understand where we are. As I tell them, if we do it right and we're able to properly incentivize it, then everybody's going to want to build a workforce and affordable housing because we will have created the incentives that drive that. But Are we going to require it in every single development, some percentage? I don't know yet. But I will say this, that if we do, then we're going to need to offer incentives to this body to make that make financial sense of the development community here in Nashville.
Just from a personal standpoint, I think that if we, and I'm not saying we're going down this route, but I think if we go down this route, then we're going to end up having unintended consequences. Simply because some developments it may not make sense for, some development it may make complete sense for. So I hope that as we move through the process, we're able to make sure we're looking at unintended consequences as well as what we're ultimately trying to accomplish. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Glover. Next is Councilman Davis again. No, I'm sorry, it was Mendez. Sorry, Davis. Okay.
Thank you. I guess this is a question for the chair or for planning. Do we have we know the mayor's office is engaging in some efforts on affordable housing. Do we have any sort of sense about how this committee is going to fit in with the efforts that are underway at the mayor's office? I know that with planning, the work you guys are doing with the consultant, I understand how we fit into that. We've been invited to the meetings, to the stakeholder meetings, appreciate that. Just wondering if any of you have a good sense of how we fit in with the mayor's efforts.
I can tell you, I haven't really discussed any coordination with the mayor's office. My goal on this committee is to give you the tools and the information to help you when the time comes to vote on this legislation, that you have as much information to make an informed decision as possible. So I was hoping that you will tell me who do you want to see coming to these meetings and what information you are interested in getting within reason. I cannot invite the president, but I mean, we can try to get as many people here to help you have an informed decision as possible. So I think that's the way I see this committee. If you guys want me to adjust anything, I'm at your service, so you tell me what you need me to do. Thank you.
If I could add that we've reached out to Eric Cole and to Adrian and invited them to participate in the same process that this committee's participating in, and hopefully they'll come to all the meetings and sit right alongside us so that it'll be a partnership the whole way through. So we have talked to them. We've told them what our schedule is and invited them to participate in the different committees that we actually have within the overall exercise that we're going through.
But I didn't invite them to this meeting. This was a kickoff meeting. I only wanted our lawyer and planning to give us an update. Councilman Davis.
Yeah, I was just going to add, they'll certainly be involved. I mean, Mayor Berry's added a great office for addressing affordability and that sort of thing. So I would assume they'll be involved, and we will continue to involve them any way we can. Zoning decisions certainly are going to fall on the council as kind of our baby. So I would assume we'll be leading the way in a lot of ways, the planning department and their planning process, and hopefully we include them in every way possible.
Thank you. Councilman O'Connell, sorry.
Mr. Chairman, thanks first for inviting those of us who are not on this committee, and I have, I guess, sort of two clarifying questions, and one of them might be for our council. I might not have been listening with sufficient intent, but is the point of this ad hoc committee specifically to address inclusionary, or is it also to be broader in looking at solutions for affordable housing? And that might also be an aspirational question for the chair.
It's really up to us. It's our committee. We were empowered to do what we think we need to do to learn and to be able to make a decision when the legislation comes back to us. So if you all want us to explore things that go beyond the scope of the legislation, we can do that.
And that's part of the reason I ask is because I notice we have some folks from the assessor's office in the audience as well. We will have an assessment coming forward that probably has a significant impact for residents of districts that, like mine, have historically had a high number of per capita residents in poverty and are also looking at significant adjustments based on the neighborhoods around them changing over the past 8 years, especially since the economic downturn, sometimes changing appreciably. We have some tools already available that are not being used by the public as much as we could, and I'm wondering if there are ways to explore, for instance, the trustees toolkit of property tax freezes and other relief, and basically doing things to ease pathways or automate pathways into those programs so that members of the general public that are eligible for property tax freezes, for instance, are able to take advantage of those prior to the next assessment.
We can definitely invite the trustee and the assessor to come and give us some information on that. That's a great idea. Thank you, Councilman.
Chair, if I may, it's our intent to not just to look at inclusionary zoning as a tool, but to look at every possible tool that's out there, some that are being used by other cities and some that we may be creating on our own. And to have this committee as part of that process as we discover those and we analyze them, and that whatever legislation that we bring forward, that it would be comprehensive, including all of those tools, not just the one stated in the legislation. And I would point out, and I think Council may agree with me, that the legislation anticipates that there are other tools that we would look at and that this body would be a part of.
And to be clear, I do appreciate that approach for your department as well as this committee. I just know we have a narrow window of time in which to operate with an existing tool that I think we could see some uptake of. Whereas I know that, for instance, an implementation of inclusionary housing might span multiple years, that kind of thing. So just to put that
Thank you. Council Lady Allen?
I'd like to follow up on the toolkit. I think it'd be really helpful if we could just get, if it can be put on one page or two, sort of a list of what some of those other standard tools are, like fee waivers for people who are doing 120% of AMI. I mean, just to kind of give the basic definition of what affordable housing is, to describe the spectrum that it covers from 30 to 120% of area mean income, and then to sort of talk about, which pieces government does and what sort of funds are available. And I think we keep talking about the tools, but we're pretty ignorant about that. And I know Jim can rattle them off, faster than you can say the alphabet. But there's this whole alphabet soup of acronyms out there for grants and things that are available. And even though we may not necessarily know exactly what they mean, just to have a summary sheet that says, other cities are doing fee waivers, they're doing density bonuses, there's grants available for this type of housing. And if poor Carrie has enough to do, I know, but I just feel like as we begin this process, most of us we only hear about one tool, and to just have a list would be really useful, I think.
Okay, Carrie's saying that's something that we're going to talk about in the next visit, what those tools are. It also sounds almost like a vocabulary list is what you're looking for, so that as we're having these conversations, everybody will understand what we're talking about. I do want to take the time, though, since you pointed out Mr. Harbison there in the back, that MDHA is a big part of this, too. I know that they weren't necessarily listed in the legislation, but if we're going to be successful, and I think we all want to be, that they have to be partners in this process, and they are being. They're on every committee that we have within the group that's working with the consultants, and we're communicating with them on a regular basis about where we are. So,
thank you. Council Lady Blaylock.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate what she said. We definitely want to have a list. And also, I know that the consultants are probably doing a lot of that already, but it would be nice when they come to us and say, hey, look, this is what we think you ought to do, and we can still look at some of the other options as well. And then to know what other cities that we compare to, what they're doing. I'm sure they're studying that as well, but I would like to see it on paper so we could see what they're doing and what works. And I don't know if there's a way to see what their council likes, and the kind of issues that they're having, especially if it's only been in place a year or so, So I guess our study of the other, cities that we compare to would be good.
Okay, and this is also a good time for me to point out that we are about just 2.5 months away from delivering this. So I'm not sure how comprehensive we can be. I'm not sure that time will allow us to be as comprehensive as we might otherwise be.
Maybe this will be a good time for you to give us an update on the process. Thank you, Mr. Sloan.
I will let the person who actually knows what that is do it.
Okay. And I'll go over the questions in a minute if you're patient with me. Thank you.
Right now, we're preparing for the consultant's second visit. So his job as a housing economist is to prepare a market feasibility study. So his first stakeholder group meeting was talking about the kinds of data that he's going to analyze to look at not just housing trends, but also things like housing in proximity to the types of jobs that need affordable and workforce housing. And the committee was really great about giving him some feedback on the kinds of data that he needs to look at. This meeting, the last part of the first visit was a short intro to other tools. He didn't get to that portion because we opened up questions and everyone was really excited to ask him questions. So we will be beginning with other tools that are used in other locations with some examples and some case studies. He will also be meeting with some developers, advocates, and some lenders to get into more detail on the kinds of things that are specific to Nashville's market that we would need either as incentives or financial tools to make affordable housing feasible. After that visit next week, it's a feasibility testing model where he puts different criteria into a model and test the feasibility of them in the Nashville market. The ideal date for us to have the report back is early to mid-December, and then we would need to turn that around into a series of ordinances by the 1st of January.
Thank you. Anything else? No? She's great, isn't she?
She is.
Okay. Okay. Council Lady Johnson?
Yes, my question is 180 days deadline, because we do have lots of issues we need to discuss and we need to make ourselves familiar with. And I understand previous council passed 180 days deadline upon us, but I think we are not quite ready. We really need to learn more. And to me, instead of passing history, it's not a good way to do more. Maybe may take extra 180 days, but do it right. I know affordable housing is a hot issue and we need to really address it before we totally lose affordable housing in this county. However, I feel not rushing is a right choice. For that, I would like to ask what kind of choice we will have in respect to previous ordinance.
Council?
Council Lady Johnson, the 180 days would be subject to amendment by this council if it so chose. The specific prescription in the ordinance states that the Executive Director of the Metro Planning Department shall submit an ordinance to the Metro Council amending the zoning code to implement the rules and regulations. If what Ms. Logan indicated was that there will be a series of ordinances, then we may already be at the point where either an extension or a change in the terms from one ordinance to multiple ordinances would be appropriate. I would suggest deferral to the planning department to determine what needs they have, and if it's a greater than 180-day period, recommend an amendment to this council.
Thank you. Councilman Mendez?
I have one comment and a question. The comment would be that I have a great deal of faith in planning that we can get it done in 180 days. As I was campaigning all across the county, and everybody in their respective districts, there is a huge desire on behalf of people all over the county to be able to figure out something about what is essentially the flight of low and middle income people out of the city because it's no longer affordable. And I don't think that we've got an extra 180 days to start addressing the issue. So I've got a great deal of faith you guys can get to the finish line in that time period. And then the question really is, I just want to clarify the logistics. You all, planning department, will be sending a proposal to the planning commission in enough time to get their approval to us in less than 180 days. Is that right?
The goal is to have it on the January 14th Planning Commission meeting. So when I said the 1st of January, that's in time to have the ordinance done, have a staff report done, have it go out to the commission for January 14th, and then between the 14th, if they suggested any amendments, we would need to change that before submitting it to council on January 20th.
Thank you. Councilman Glover?
I think the questions that are coming are good. The 180 days, I think, is debatable with regards, and here's why I think it's debatable. I think if you had a straight 6-month period without a Thanksgiving and a Christmas holiday in the middle of it, or as a part of it, then that might be a very realistic goal. I think given that we've sat here and we see how things come to a screeching halt with the holidays and that people are traveling, et cetera, it may be challenging for us to really get our heads wrapped around it by January 14th when you submit it to the Planning Commission, et cetera. So I would just throw this out there, not as just food for thought for right now, that if we hit the holiday season and if we as this committee or we as the council don't feel like we have our heads wrapped around this enough, I think at that point, Mr. Jameson, we come back with an amendment to perhaps give it another couple of weeks or a month or so. I don't think it would take much more than that. Doug, is that, Mr. Sloan, what's your thoughts there?
Well, you have a little bit of a problem, and that your original legislation was an amendment to the zoning code, and so you would be seeking to amend the zoning code, and that time may have actually already passed. And so I'm not sure the mechanism that you would employ to extend the deadline. Not that Ms. Logan and I aren't looking forward to spending our Christmas and New Year's working on this, but I'm afraid that time may have already passed. I don't know what the mechanism would be. I would look to Mr. Jameson to tell me if there's another option.
I'm going to ask the question. So we're coming together to start talking about something that if we don't like it, too bad. We've already crossed the timeline.
No, sir. That timeline is just imposed upon me, actually. Okay. And that once I hand the legislation, the proposed legislation, to this body, then this body can deliberate as long as it wants to come up with the right solutions.
So we'll still have the same procedures. Once it comes to us, if we want to amend and do all, okay. So
and I'm not, Mr. Jameson probably is better to speak to that about what the restrictions are once I hand the legislation off to this body.
The one concern I would throw out there, just for housekeeping purposes, is the spring tsunami period, also known as the budget season, that you do not want to conflate the two if it can be avoided.
I totally agree. It's just knowing the holidays and realizing that it's going to be virtually impossible to come together for certain times to talk about this. I know that we'll rush and everything will go into high gear on January the 1st once we finish New Year's, and that's my only concern. And so I was asking what mechanisms was there, and if it's basically a bill comes to us and then after it's finished at Planning Committee, it's going to act just like anything normal, then we obviously have the opportunity here on the floor to amend and change the timeline here.
Correct.
We will have more meetings, so we don't have to answer all the questions today. This is just a kickoff. So I know many of you want to go to the Greenway thing. I have Scott Davis on the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sure maybe if this is repetitive, pardon me, Mr. Sloan, I missed the first meeting on this. I wish I was there than where I was. But more importantly right now is one way that what we can do right now to kind of help with the situation. Now, we were able to do this because working with the developer, they were trusting and they were able to help those members of my community. One thing about keeping affordable housing is fixing the housing of the seniors and those that are less fortunate, so we don't have to worry about them being displaced. And one thing, with Rebuilding Nashville, several of my developers in the district work with Rebuilding Nashville and Hands on Nashville to provide funds in order to fix the senior housing and also housing for workforce folks, because what's happened, especially in historic areas like within East Nashville, maybe other areas of West Nashville, I had a Metro employee, a public works employee, that he had some hail damage to his roof, and his insurance company said that was previous damage to your roof. We're not going to cover that. And in fact, if you don't fix this, then you'll be in violation of your mortgage because we're going to drop your insurance. And so he's in panic mode because he doesn't have, $5,000 or $7,000 to fix this roof because, I'm not trying to be funny, he works for Metro. And what's happening right now is you have a lot of insurance companies that would go around and they'll do these assessments. And I could bring at least 5 people from my neighborhood to talk about this. And what's happened, I'm not going to put the insurance company on Front Street, but it's 2 in particular. And what happens is they're in desperate area. Well, I've been living in this house for 5, maybe 30 years, and I paid my insurance every month on time, either through escrow or through whatever. And all of a sudden, I'm going to lose my house because I'll be in violation of my mortgage. I won't be able to get insurance, so I got to quickly sell my house. And we buy houses quickly. And this is what happens, and they get displaced. Now, if I've seen it 5 times that we've been able to help, and I've seen it another 3 which we weren't able to help in time. So I know in everyone else's district that this is happening, and we may not know it. And so with using, and I don't know how we could do it legislative-wise. I'm open to any ideas. Like what Live Development did is when we approved their 310 units off of Gallatin Road and with all the improvements, I asked them, could you help me fix 10 houses in the Maxwell Heights and Greenwood area? They did it.
Councilman, sorry to cut you off, but I mean, that's a great point, but I wanted today to be about the legislation and the update on this.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
No. I feel terrible cutting you off, but I wanted to finish it by 5:30. If you guys are okay waiting 10 more minutes, we can get more questions in, or we can wrap it up at 5:30. Are you okay with 10 more minutes? Yes? Okay. Are you good?
Is there anything legislative-wise we can, I don't think we can require in a zoning that, hey man, you're building 400 units, I need you to fix 10. People who need their houses fixed or anything like that to kind of help, like my colleague in front was saying that there's people that are hurting now. He walked all over the county. And I'm sure in all our districts there are people that could be helped. And so any suggestions, I'm open to it.
Thank you, Councilman. Yes, Councilman Davis.
Well, just a quick comment on that, and like they said, they're looking at all these different options. If they did like the in lieu fund or something like that, anything that funnels into the Barnes Fund, for example, can be put towards the Rebuilding Together type programs, and we need to sort of outline that's what we want out of that fund, more things to go in that direction and how that pie is dispersed, but that would be one way, for example. So I think they'll be coming up with those kind of ways, and that we've mentioned programs like Rebuilding Nashville and that keeping people in their homes should be a piece of the puzzle.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Coleman, you still want to talk?
I did, but at the same time, I knew you were trying to let us out early. I just had one, question for Director Sloan. On your makeup of your board, do you have the realtors included there? Realtors included?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We have several realtors on there. We have developers that do market rate housing. We have developers that do affordable housing. We have housing advocates. We have lending organizations that both lend to affordable housing and traditional lending organizations. We have people who live in workforce and affordable housing. We tried to communicate. We have people who build apartment complexes. We tried to touch on every cross-section of the community, both those that are engaged today in workforce and affordable housing and those that aren't, those that are just engaged in the real estate market, from lending to occupants, everything in between, because we felt like by doing that, we would hopefully ferret out every opportunity to encourage the continued building of workforce and affordable housing.
Okay, and final question, on the updates that you're getting from the consultant, are those published or are you waiting until the end? And one of the reasons I was listening at Councilman Johnson, and if in fact we were given something that we can travel along with you, it wouldn't be such a jolt to us when we get it in January.
Everything that we have right now is posted on our website, which is the presentation from the first meeting and a video of the first meeting, so that anyone can watch it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, for the people that are watching this on TV, I recommend that you visit the webpage for the planning department. They have a lot of information there. Also, you can watch some of the deliberations on the YouTube channel by Metro. They are available there. Council Lady Johnson? You're good? Okay. Bircher? You're good too? Okay. Sledge. Councilman Sledge.
This is a quick question of the department. I know we've got a pretty robust public engagement process right now as we form this legislation. Once you turn that over to us, is there any additional engagement that you foresee being led by the department about the proposed legislation or guidelines that you'll bring out?
We don't have any planned right now, but I think your point is well taken, that for this to be successful, that even once we hand off whatever legislation that we offer, our department, the experience that we have would encourage then for us to have a very open community conversation about those tools that we have enumerated in that legislation and vet that. What we hope, and again, the timeline constricts our ability to do this, but what we hope is that what we offer, that the same people that we've tried to engage across the spectrum of the real estate market, that they will be side by side with us, encouraging the piece of legislation that we offer to this body, so that when we do go out in the community, it should be an easy sell. That's what we hope and aspire to. But I do agree with you, and I encourage that even once the legislation is given to the council, that then there be a robust public engagement piece that we will be happy to assist with.
That would be great. I think it would help us, especially when we're talking about a timeline that may be a little constricted. If we can have as many feedback mechanisms as possible, it would help us. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming to the meeting. Do you want us to have meetings like this for the foreseeable future, have one every 2 weeks because clearly we are under the gun, and so we can do once a month, or we can do 2 meetings a month until the deadline. It's really up to you. Let me know what you think. The other thing is, for people that are watching on TV, these meetings are for the council, but you can still reach out to the committee by emailing your council members and having the council members come to these meetings and ask questions. So make sure that you reach out. The website with the emails for all the council members are on nashville.gov, and that's a website with all the information. So make sure you reach out to your council member. And appreciate the planning department staff and Mr. Jameson and all of you for coming today, and the meeting is adjourned. I want to do this. Hold on. Thank you.